Michele is comfortable, I will.
I started. I started while you were talking.
I
I
know, I
did it.
saw it. I saw that red button.
Hey, okay, so a big hearty hello to everybody that's listening or watching on YouTube. Um, see, I'm actually doing an introduction, Laura. I'm getting better at this. I'm learning things. So we're going to do a Q&A episode today, and I have two amazing, brilliant people with me, and I'm going to introduce them one at a time. Laura is coming back. Laura's been on the podcast before, but for those who haven't heard an episode with Laura on it, Laura is the COO of Submersion, a training company that specializes in writing difficult conversations, and she's a fantastic and amazing editor who's she's edited 7 of my 10 books, which I super appreciate because yeah, they wouldn't have been readable without her
That's
work.
not true.
It's
Come on.
100% true. And then also with us today for the first time is Michele Berger. Michele is a professor and writer and coach, and all around wonderful person. So I'm going to read off a couple places that you write speculative fiction and poetry, which I think is fantastic, and some creative nonfiction as well. And I'm going to read off some of the places you've been published or are going or have work pending. 100-Word Story, Glint Literary Journal, The Wild World, Thing Magazine, Blood and Bourbon, Faya, the Magazine of Black Spectral Fiction, Flying South, Oracle, a Fine Arts Review, Carolina Women, the Feminist Wire, Western North Carolina Women, and various zines and anthologies. So that's quite an impressive resume of publishing. And you also won, I think this is really cool. You also won the 2019 Carl Branding Kindred Award for Doll Seed, which was published in Faya, which is a fantastic online magazine. My friend Bishop Garrison just got a piece in there, which he was real excited about. So, Michele, tell us something about yourself, just to let the listeners get to know you. Tell us something about yourself that I didn't just include in all those accolades.
Well, first, let me say that it's just such an honor to be here and hang out with y'all tonight and talk. And we've been laughing ahead of time. So
Yeah.
my voice sounds probably a little higher than it usually.
Yeah. And we'll make you regret that. Thanks by the end of the podcast.
And, when you're reading over my bio, it's just so interesting because I feel like, I have been at this a long time, but really in the last 10 years, if I didn't meet my writing teacher, I probably would have stopped writing because I was like that writer who wrote metaphorically like in the basement and didn't get a lot of support and didn't have creative community. And I kept rewriting things and rewriting things. I have a 400,000 word novel that will never see the light of day. And I just thought it was really clever to figure things out. So it feels really gratifying to be here with you tonight and talking about writing and talking about dialogue. And one thing that you wouldn't know about me is that I don't think you read in my bio, I am a pug lover. And
Nice.
I used to own pugs. Unfortunately, I don't have them right now, but I have many pug accessories. And I talk about like pug consciousness, like,
That's
like
amazing.
pug lovers, we find each other, and I have like a pug bag and a pug purse. Anyway, I try to, kind of keep it in line.
What is it about pugs?
Well, you just look at them and you think the universe has a sense of humor because they are such incredibly strange and funny creatures, but they're so sweet and smart and funny. And I was a woman who would dress up my dogs. I didn't know that about myself until I had pugs.
That's fantastic. My
So
wife does that as well.
I
Ah,
find that people who are pug lovers are like pug lovers for life, and they tend to like find each other, and everything is about pug life. Have you noticed and experienced that for yourself?
absolutely. I think it was a couple of years ago, there was a charity, a Pugalooza kind of situation.
No way. That makes me so happy.
My partner, who is not as excited about animals in the house, was like, okay, you go to that with your friend. And so I went with a friend, and there was like, pugs dressed up as Wonder Woman and just pugs doing all sorts of wonderful things. And you really like it was hardcore. It was hardcore.
That's amazing. That's so great.
T-shirts, all sorts of things.
Yeah, I love those relationships, those moments in relationships where our other half, our partner, is like, "Hey, you can go do that part by yourself." That's
Have a good time,
yeah, that's really what writing is for me. Wendy's always like, "Yeah, just go do that alone." She's like, "I don't need to do that." Yeah, Laura, Jason, got anything that he sends you off by yourself to do?
So Jason and I have a rule. If one of us wants to do something like concert or movie or play, we have 2 tickets, and then we find somebody else to go with us, so the other doesn't have to go. So, like, I love Cirque du Soleil. I've taken several people to go see Cirque with me, and Jason loves like Effervescence and some other music that is not for me. I mean, they're very, very talented, but yeah. So and loves to see Jerry Seinfeld, so he does that with other people. So, but we always buy the tickets because we would be buying too if we had similar interests. So
fantastic.
Yeah, we have a lot of those things.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to all the things that Jason has invited me to now, thinking that he had me in mind from the beginning, and realizing now that I was just the extra ticket.
Yeah, like Star Wars. He likes to take you to Star Wars.
Yeah.
He took me to one, and I complained the whole movie.
What? Wait, a recent Star Wars? Okay, Laura.
It was the one where
it doesn't matter for Star Wars fans.
World exploded, maybe.
Okay. Well, I kind of understand. I mean, I don't want to start the controversy, but yeah, I kind of understand. With the recent ones, I understand. But is that you're not a Star Wars sci-fi in that?
I like sci-fi. I just don't like Star Wars. I can't. I've tried.
I'm just gonna let you sit in silence, in the silence of shame.
It's fine. I'm not ashamed.
I'm just gonna let you sit in the silence of shame.
I'm a proud Star.
I do love me some Star Trek. I love me some Marvel comic movies.
Okay.
But I can't make. There was so much happening. I didn't know what happened, and then I fell asleep. And then I woke up, and they were still fighting over nothing, and I couldn't tell which ships were the good ships and which ships were the bad ships. If I can't tell who is the good guy and the bad guy, like, what's the point?
Have you seen The Matrix?
The first one and the second one, but I gave up and didn't watch the third one.
Okay.
Well, that's understandable.
We'll still keep you in the Zoom room because The Matrix is sort of my. I'm more like, okay, people need to see The Matrix and need to love it, and I'm really a very open-minded person, but when it comes,
that's your line. The Matrix is your line.
Matrix.
That's
the
awesome.
Matrix is it.
Yeah, Keanu is your line. This is a fun story. One of my wife and I's first dates was to the first Matrix movie. Actually, we'd been dating for like 6 or 7 months. But she had mono when we went. So she saw the first 10 minutes and then she fell asleep right before the red pill, blue pill conversation. Oh. And then she woke up an hour into it, like right as the big fight scene at the end starts. And she goes, "Catch me up." I was like, no. No, I'm not catching you up. She's like, "When did he learn karate?" I was like, I can't.
No.
She's seen it since, but that was she fell asleep and it was like, "Catch me up." It's like, oh, I can't catch you up. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of stories, and see, look at me, Laura, transitioning to the point.
That was a really, really smooth segue.
Yes.
That was like.
Wait, was it really? Or are you teasing me?
No.
Well, but if you call attention to it now.
Speaking of stories, really, come on.
Speaking of great stories that people sleep through, no.
I thought you were referring to the fact that like you just told a story, like. I just told a story, so speaking of stories.
Oh, is that a better segue or a worse segue?
I mean,
They're both terrible.
I
It's
feel
okay.
like you could just say, okay, let's get to the point, and that would be
Yeah.
just
This is
I'm
episode
sorry.
31. Maybe when I'm on like episode 150, I'll actually like be smooth at this. But we do have a question for today.
Question.
So our question for today is, what do authors do in dialogue that makes you stop reading? So what happens in dialogue that makes you put the book down? This is a very personal and passionate question for me because I got really, really angry at a book this weekend, and I've been ranting about it for a week. I ranted about it on the last podcast. I did a whole bonus episode about it, and
Oh
I'm
my goodness.
continuing to rant about it this week because it made me so angry. So this is my selfish time, but I'll let somebody else go first. Anybody got an answer off the top of their head before I start ranting?
Well,
Go
it's
ahead.
it's funny because, thinking about this question, if the dialogue is weak, I'm usually, to me that says other things about the book. So I kind of had to think about what it is. I mean, I have a couple of things, but one thing that will annoy me, I'm not sure I'll put the book down, but it'll annoy me, is if you have a character and they say something to another character, and then so that there's the author starts off with a kind of a body movement, and then they say something, and then they come back to a body movement, and then they say something and they come back, but in a way that doesn't really give you a dynamic image of the character. So you actually don't need that layering if you have a really precise description of how the character expresses anxiety, or how the character is feeling angry. You don't need to kind of bunch those things up. So that is one of the things I dislike. I will say one of my pet peeves is sort of flat characters, that there's no subtext in the dialogue. That's something that actually will make me put down a book.
Yeah, the broken dialogue tags that you're describing, that first is what just my language for it, where like the character starts a sentence, and then like at some random point for no reason we get like a body motion, and then they pick back up the sentence, drives me insane. And it doesn't even have to be like at the break of a sentence. Like a lot of times what frustrates me is they're breaking like the rhythm of the phrase, which just drives me crazy. Like put it all together, and you can give me the fancy body motion or whatever you're going to do at the beginning or at the end, but let me actually like hear their voice carry all the way through.
Absolutely.
Michelle, I really love what you just said, because I agree with you completely. The best writers don't have to tell you that the character is feeling angry. You feel anger with the character because of what they're expressing. So I'm 100% with you on that. I think that's a great observation. So.
Yeah, Laura, you got one? Something that drives you crazy about dialogue?
So I have a dirty little secret about books.
Ooh.
I don't buy a book until I've read at least 3 or 4 pages. Sometimes I'll start at the beginning. Sometimes I'll open a book to the middle. And most of the listeners have heard me say that I am a lazy reader. So these tags that you're talking about and these gestures, I don't actually know that they exist because I don't actually read them. And if there are too many paragraphs in a row that don't have any dialogue in them, I usually skip those too. So one of my I won't say that I put a book down, but I won't actually pick it up, is if there isn't enough dialogue. Because I can't get to know the characters. Yeah. So Jeff has allowed me to be in charge of picking the next book for the book club, because I have threatened several times to not participate anymore. Because while
I'm holding up a copy of Ernest Hemingway to haunt Laura because she hates it so much.
I loved Toni Morrison's Beloved.
Oh, yes.
It was such a heart-wrenching read.
Yeah, that was our first book club book.
To then follow it up with Hemingway.
Right. So okay. Okay, who made that choice? Yeah, those are just real opposite ends of the spectrum.
I picked both.
Which is why I am in charge of the next book. And
Have you picked
I'm
one yet?
going,
Can
yes.
we unleash it right now?
I mean, if you want to.
Yeah, unleash it right
But
now.
you can't veto it.
No, I already told you I wouldn't veto it. I
Okay,
told you I'd read
so
whatever you gave me.
I'm going in a totally different direction.
It's infinite jest, isn't it?
How did you know?
Yes.
No, we are not.
Oh.
Okay, so I did a ton of research on what kind of book, like, but see, when I read, I want to read because I don't want to have to learn anything. I just want to have fun. So I found an author named Tracy Clark. She writes, she's a native Chicagoite. I don't know. She lives in Chicago. And she writes detective.
Chicagonian?
Yeah,
I think that's right.
We'll call it. Yeah, we'll call it.
I mean, I will defer to people who know language, says the editor. So she has a series of books about a private eye who solves crime. And as I do, I read like the first 2 chapters of 2 of her books. And there's not a ton of dialogue that's there, but the dialogue that is there it's just amazing. So I think we're going to do borrowed time or borrowing time.
Borrowing time. You got it. I'm going to look it up.
I'm
going to go buy it tonight.
I was super impressed with it.
Awesome.
So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a powerful observation too, because that's what most people are going to read the first 2 or 3 pages, and there has to be something compelling and that brings them into the story. So that makes complete sense. There's no shame there. There's no shame.
No.
Thank you. I knew I liked you. I liked you from the first moment Jeff hit record. No, I liked you well before that. But I feel like for the listeners, nothing happens before record, right? Like we cease to exist before and after record.
Is that how that works?
That's I don't know.
They knew.
In my 20s, I went on a date with a guy who literally told me no one exists outside of when he is with them. And I was like, then how do I have like my own history? And he's like, oh no, that's just made up just so I have something interesting to learn about. I was like,
wow. And you were like, do you bury your knives under like where are your knives kept? Like I would be immediately worried. But
yeah, there was not a second date after that.
That's good. That's probably a good thing.
Yeah. But that's just because he forgot what you were like. So you couldn't actually exist.
Well, I mean, he doesn't actually matter. It doesn't actually matter because I don't actually exist because.
Yeah. He went home and he was like, I didn't like that one. I'm going to imagine a completely new one.
Yeah.
No second date.
I do hope he imagined somebody wonderful for him.
Oh man. Yeah. Okay, going back to dialogue. Look at my other segue. I did great.
That was a good one.
Going back to dialogue. So one of my pet peeves is, and it goes off of what you both were talking about how we as readers connect to characters' voices, right? Like Laura saying that like I skim paragraphs that don't have things, and Michele, you saying that like I can't stand a book that has this flat dialogue that's like just like there's no modulation to the voice at all in emotional circumstances or other circumstances. I think one of the things that drives me crazy is when you take a scene that like has so much potential and instead of giving us the scene, you summarize it. Drives my absolutely.
That's a good one.
Now my rant begins.
Okay, but but you are so, if you're talking about the same book, because for listeners, Jeff and I are on in a Slack channel together, and you had such high hope. So
loved it. Oh my gosh, I loved it so much, and I will leave the book out of this podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, I love the book so much, and the reason I loved it is because there are these 5 characters. And they'd have these big cast scenes where all 5 characters are sitting in a circle and they're just talking about this TV show they're making. And those big cast scenes are so funny and so endearing and so full of personality. And then one scene in particular, those 5 people go to a party and we get this great conversation between one of those five and this the wife of another one of the characters, and you learn that the wife is a horrible person, and that's been hinted to through the whole thing, but now you actually feel her horribleness because you get to hear her voice for the first time. And I was reading the conversation, I was like, oh my gosh, she is horrible, like she's terrible. I don't want this woman to interfere with my five friends, like I want her gone. And then at the end of the chapter, so the character says goodbye to the horrible woman. And then he's like, and the five friends went to a bar and solved all their problems by talking all night long. And that gave this character the courage to go home and have a very difficult conversation with his wife and dissolve his marriage. Next chapter. And I was like, why would you steal all of that from me? I want to see all of that. Like, I want to see the conversation at the bar. I want to laugh with them at the bar. I want to be a part of that. And then I want to see this main character like gather the courage to go home and like do this, because he was kind of a mousy character. And by summarizing it, you totally just stole it from me as a reader. And it was not kind. Thankfully the rest of the book was good enough to keep me reading, but that really made me angry. Yeah.
Did the writer ever come back to that, what had happened, or okay.
Nope, that paragraph is
that's
all
so
you get.
that's so odd, right? Because if
Yeah.
they usually, if you have if you're having a character, if you had the wife displayed on the page and there was that whole buildup, usually it would make sense to then see the character. So
Yeah.
odd.
I find with as writers, I catch myself summarizing conversations in books as well. And when I edit people's books, I catch it all the time. And when I edit people's like chapters, I catch it all the time. And it's not 100%, but about 60% of the time, what I find is that the scene we're summarizing is either too emotional or too complicated. And so we summarize it because we don't want to like deal with what it's going to force us to grapple with. So like if it's too complicated, we can't quite sort it out. We don't really know how it happens. So we're like, summarize. If it's too emotional, we're like, I don't really want to touch that part of myself to write that. So I'm going to summarize that too. So a lot of it's avoidance. It's like, we don't want to deal with this.
It's also, I think also it's the storytelling. I mean, I agree with you. There is that avoidance factor, but like we have this, and I talk about it and joke about it all the time. Like in my movies, I just want something to explode, and then I want somebody to scream at somebody, and then I want something else to explode, and then I want a fight scene, and then I want a resolution, and then I want everybody like shaking hands and having a beer, right? Like that's every movie that I've ever watched and enjoyed.
That's why you hate Star Wars. There's too much whiny Luke running around.
Right?
Like, no, you're not my dad. Yeah.
So much talking.
So much talking.
There is a lot of talking. Sorry.
And about not like, anyway, that's beside the point. But as writers, it's like there's this thing where it's like it's about the story, it's about moving the plot along. So sometimes we think that those elements that are decision making don't matter as much as the decision. So we put the decision on the page to move the story forward, forgetting that our readers don't care as much about the plot line if they're invested in the characters. They care about the plot line when they're not invested in the characters. So we have this sort of either or thinking a lot. And I think when we're really paying attention to, that's not to say that there aren't authors who really are doing what you're saying, Jeff, and avoiding for some reason. But I also think that sometimes we don't even think about it. I mean, you've been running this course, and I've horned in on it.
It's completely not true. We ran it together.
20 weeks of people just thinking about dialogue and almost thinking about dialogue for the first time. Like it's and I don't have as much experience within the writing community as the two of you do. So this is kind of like me, this is like my foray into it. So watching people go, oh, yeah, I could do that in dialogue. Oh, yeah, that is important. So I think that a lot of it is just this like, we don't really understand as writers how to use dialogue in a way that's maybe more engaging to our readers. So
It's so interesting because I always, usually when I start writing, I start with a character and I hear their voice really clearly. And so it's just interesting that people like dialogue is always something I'm thinking about because it's so connected to the character. But I think your point is really well taken too, that by the time people get to a second or third draft, maybe they have a little bit of time and space to think, oh
mm-hmm.
yeah, I need to do more. I could do more. I need to think about,
Mm-hmm.
how, and also the kind of emotional stakes that are on the page and how that's shaping between how the characters talk to each other.
Yeah, and I think another one of my pet peeves is kind of the opposite of the flat dialogue, which is the emotionally erratic dialogue. And it
Mm-hmm.
comes from,
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, Michele, neglecting to think about the emotional resonance of the page and like just throwing emotions into a scene willy-nilly because we feel like it makes it more dramatic. So you'll have a character that's like happy at one moment and then super sad at the next moment, and then the next line he's like cracking a joke, and then he's like really serious, and then he's like cracking a joke again, and he's really serious. And as a reader, I start reading that and I just feel like I'm like going up and down and up and down and up and down, and I'll just skip to the next chapter, like I'm just moving on to the next. I can't.
Wow, okay, y'all are serious about like
Yeah.
moving through stuff when it
Well,
doesn't work.
Oh yeah, no, I don't read books if it's not working. I'm like, keep going.
well, and
There's not enough time.
there's not enough time, right? Like we all have so much happening that I find that for myself, I'm very protective. Like if I only have an hour a night to read because I'm watching 7 episodes of Who's the Boss, whatever. But like if I'm only putting that 1 hour, I want it to be something that I'm going to enjoy, something that I'm going to feel, which is one of the reasons why I enjoyed reading Toni Morrison so much more than I enjoy reading Hemingway, right? Like while I felt emotionally raw after every moment with Toni Morrison's book, I felt something the whole time. It kept me wanting to be there with the characters. I wanted to like go on that journey with them. And with Hemingway, I'm like, yeah, you all are talking about stuff, but not having any connection.
I'm gonna save my protests for next
Well,
for 2 weeks when we actually record the podcast about Hemingway.
I gotta talk about it now because I'm gonna get shut down.
That's right. You're gonna get on with Faye, and Vincent is another guy coming to that one, and we're gonna shut you down.
And I'm gonna be told that I don't understand it, and I'm okay with that. I don't.
Well, and there is that sort of repetition. I mean, not to beat up on Hemingway, who's obviously wonderful, but there's definitely there's subjective pools of thought around what compels readers, and yeah, Hemingway, I so appreciate the craft. There are times I'm like I'm not quite there with you. Yeah, I just
yeah. I've had a deeper the first part, because he's got The Sun Also Rises divided into parts. The first part was really hard for me, and then things happened politically in our country that made me appreciate the expat side of him, and all of a sudden the book took on deeper meaning for me. It's still not beloved, but it's I appreciate what the characters are doing more.
Can I just go back to what you said earlier, Jeff, about the emotional inconsistency, the up and down? Not to take us onto a side tangent, but I was so
that's all we do here.
Do it. We're here. We're here with you.
So last year, my partner and I, we usually we try to read aloud to each other, a novel, and that's
Mhm.
one of our things that we do in the evening. And so we decided to tackle The Stand last year, because I'm a Stephen
Oh,
King person. I write quite a
Oh,
bit of horror, and I'd never read that. And we did the unabridged version. So,
oh,
we went through it,
you were
but
reading for like 90,000 hours.
it was such a, but and I really appreciated that book in so many ways, and even the diversions. But then I just recently saw the Stand, through
mm,
CBS. I signed up, super excited, and there is such, between scene, from character to character, scene to scene, these kind of completely reversed reactions that don't, there's not
Mm,
enough buildup. It just is
mhm.
interesting to see that in kind of a visual format, because I was quite yeah, not to start a whole new thread, but yeah, did not quite go as I had hoped. And there was,
Yeah.
because of some of that lack of emotional resonance
yeah,
and
yeah,
kind of
Mhm.
characters moving around.
yeah.
Mhm. So if you're into The Stand, I would definitely recommend the early 90s
Yeah,
miniseries.
I remember seeing that as a
Right?
That
young
Like
was great.
person.
they
Think this is great, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
So
yeah,
good.
yeah,
yeah.
they definitely but I've seen the commercials for The Stand, and I'm not sure I can do it. After Gary Sinise, how can anybody else be Stu Redman ever?
Yeah.
It's worth watching if you're
Is
a
it?
fan. It's worth
Okay.
watching, just because they did interesting things with the casting, and they added in pieces that are not in from what I remember of the
Hmm.
80s or 90s.
Yeah.
But definitely there, I'm like, okay, this could have been a lot longer. It's only 9 episodes, so
Oh,
Really?
that's
mhm,
Well, I guess the
shocking.
miniseries was only 4 2-hour episodes, so I guess that's the equivalent of 9.
yeah. It's different now though. You have kind of unlimited time when you're
It's
streaming. I
true.
don't know why you wouldn't just do the whole thing. The
Budget.
Stand was my introduction to like epic novels outside of military novels. I was a huge Clancy reader when I was a kid. Like in teenage
Mm.
years, I used to love reading those like massive Clancy books. And The Stand was the first like massive book I read that was like away from Clancy's
Mm.
crazy. Let me describe it. And see, Clancy has a huge book, but I'd skip big parts of it because he'd go on for like 10 pages about talking about a battleship, and I'd be like, I don't care. And then get back to, yeah, give
I'm
me
such
back
a
to the action.
committer. I'm such a committer. I like will never skip things.
Oh,
Oh yeah, I think I read less of books than I actually. Yeah, I skip more than I read oftentimes. I'm pretty bad about that, but um, and so Clancy is one that I was never able to get into because I found that all of his characters kind of sound the same.
oh yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
And so I don't really understand how letters go together to make words.
yeah.
So names are very confusing to me. So when I come across a character, I create a picture of that character in my mind rather than understanding their name. Um, so especially names that I'm not overly familiar with, or like if they're using last names, like I have a really hard time with that. So I create pictures in my head of who the characters are. So when all the characters sound the same, plus I'm skipping all the like tags,
Mhm.
so I have to be able to read. I have to be able to read a scene and understand who's speaking just by their voice. And I always found Clancy very difficult because first of all, he always had so many characters. If I'm thinking of Clancy and not somebody else, but
You are,
like,
yeah. I mean,
okay,
Jack Ryan was the key, but yeah, he's got 1,000 characters in every book. Yeah.
yeah. So, and like everybody kind of has the same cadence, has the
Mhm.
same tone, has the same clip to their voice. And I was never able to figure out who was talking. And it's not just his work. Like there are a lot of writers who kind of everybody has the same tone. And I find that as a reader very difficult. Um,
Yeah, I think the more we
so
get into genre conventions as writers, the less we focus on characterization. Like you were saying, Michelle, like focusing on like, okay, I'm writing this piece because I have this character and this voice in mind, and I want to bring this voice to life.
mhm.
The more we get into, I need to write to this genre, which was very Clancy, right? Like Clancy kind of defined the military genre. We start focusing so much on hitting the right plot beats
Mm-hmm.
and hitting the like genre expectations that we start to lose the desire to create really passionate characters
Mm-hmm.
that like people just connect with.
Yeah.
So I, and I found myself doing it. Like when I sit down to think about like writing a mystery, I'm usually like, okay, what's the mystery and how am I going to solve it and where am I going to lay out the clues? And I have to stop myself and be like, wait, what characters am I going to create that are actually going to keep the reader interested in
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
and reading to the end? Yeah.
And as a reader, I can tell when the character is an afterthought versus when the character is
Oh,
like
100%.
the main. So
Yeah.
Michele, I mentioned before we started recording that I had the opportunity to read the start of your book, Renew You. And I was immediately drawn to the main character because I could tell she had a story that she wanted to tell. And I was all in for that. So it really, there's a difference as a reader in the characters who are going to come to life and whose voices are going to like have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for that. And
Yeah.
that story is told through the two first person narrators, and something we haven't talked about. I don't know if Jeff, you think about kind of pet peeves around first person, third person point of views and some of the challenges people can get into, but yeah, I want to, I heard some writers say this is not my idea, but I want people to be so connected to the work that they're like, oh my goodness, I need to have a bathroom break, or I need to get up, but I don't want to stop reading, right? That's like what we
Yeah.
want. And that's
Yep.
so hard to achieve. We have to work at it through our characters. I mean, through all aspects of our work. But
Yeah.
And I love the way you describe that because I tend to read right before bed. And I always want a book that is going to make me read another chapter, even though it's 4 a.m. and I know I have a meeting at 9 in the morning, right? Like that's the kind of book I want to read. I want to read the book that, at the end, I'm so invested in the character
Mm-hmm.
that I know there's another one sitting on my Kindle and I can just hit that button. Actually, I don't even have a Kindle. I have I'm a Barnes and Noble fan, so I have a Nook. I call it a Kindle, but it's actually a Nook, and I'm thank you, Barnes and Noble. Please sponsor this podcast.
yes.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan.
They got so many problems. They can't sponsor this podcast. They got to keep all of that money, keep those stores open. They got to keep all that money where they're
Okay, well, they don't have to sponsor it, but they could like hashtag us or something social media-ish. I'm so old.
It's
No,
really
it's
I'm like
think
400
big. That's
old.
right. Absolutely.
They could hashtag us. That sounds like a terrible thing to do to somebody. I'm gonna hashtag you.
I'm like
TikTok.
Lieutenant Provenza on Major Crimes and The Closer, and I say things
Yeah,
like on
yes.
the Facebook and on the Instagram.
On the Facebook, in the interwebs.
In the interwebs.
Oh man, yeah. And we work for a tech company.
I mean, you might work for a tech company. I work for a company that trains communication skills.
Fair. Well played. Nicely done.
I think it really depends on defining.
Nicely done. Yeah. Any other pet peeves around books and dialogue? Anything we haven't brought up yet? That's doing.
Yeah, I think this is one that maybe you've talked about in other podcasts. Too much, you have to be very thoughtful about accents and dialects, right? And because it's easy to get that wrong, it's easy to be offensive, and you really kind of have to think through that. And I just, when you see it done badly or ineptly, it's such a deal breaker, and it can be really hard to read on the page. So those are things that we have to think about as well.
Yeah, there's a fine line between using a accent or a dialect to build unique voices in your cast and being insulting to a culture. It's such a tightrope to walk. It's terrifying. Yeah. Michele, you got any tips for writers as to how to do that well?
Yeah, I think
my tip is like, don't.
No, because we have to try, and then we get good editing, right? And we work with Jeff, and like we find out what's wrong. I like what Rachel Herron says, which is a sort of a standard, is that when you're first introducing a character, which I think is just a good sense, like when that character walks onto the stage for the reader, to think about getting, if they have a dialect or an accent, just using two or three lines perhaps, either in dialogue or some kind of context, and then it solidifies in the reader's brain. You don't have to keep saying this person has a Scottish accent or Southern accent.
Yeah.
And then maybe throughout, you on per page, maybe you have one saying or something that's italicized, right, just to remind the reader, but just kind of a light touch after that first time that the character walks on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good tip. Laura, you have any thoughts toward it?
So first of all, I agree so much. And I think, not to get into the social justice and the white supremacist culture too deeply, but as white readership, we don't always understand the impact that misrepresented cultures, and I don't care if that culture is racial, ethnic, gender, or even socioeconomic status or ableism, right? Like diversity happens everywhere, and when we're misrepresenting it, it's hurtful and violent toward other cultures. And I think my spouse and I just watched, I think it was a Netflix movie about them trying to pull the Apu character off of The Simpsons. I watched the whole movie, and I don't know the main character's name, who's like campaigning to The Simpsons, but they were interviewing so many people in the community about how offensive this character was. And I think about that when I read it, and it feels so inauthentic. So my recommendation is, if you are writing a character, you find somebody you trust who is a member of that community and have them authenticate the voice. Like that is something. So like if somebody were to ask me to edit a voice that wasn't from my own experiences, I would definitely have to recommend a different editor for that, because we don't know what we don't know, and we would never want to even unintentionally put something out into the world. So Michele, I love that you brought that up today. So that would be the only thing that I would have to add.
Yeah,
and we have so many more tools and resources. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah,
no,
there's
please,
so many more.
please jump in.
This is such a great conversation that publishing is having, that writers are having. We have, instead of talking about sensitivity readers, moving to thinking about accuracy readers. So just the sense of like, we all need to have be in conversation as we write across. And I know this is something, Jeff, that you've thought a lot about too, just as we write across different people's lived experiences.
Right.
That's so powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, and what I love is that there's such a movement to write that diversity, as opposed to like shying away from it with this idea that, well, I don't know it, so I can't write it. That's not the right approach. It's learn it so that you can write it. Create a team around you who can help you write it so that there is diversity, because it benefits everyone.
And I think there's a difference too between writing a character who has a different life experience than you do. However, in the book is not about that character's lived experience, right? So I think the challenge is when people also write characters that are deeply supposed to be about that community's lived experience, as opposed to, that you might have a diverse set of characters
Right.
and they're doing whatever, as opposed to like, I'm going to write about, this specific area and I might not have that. So I think, so we want to think about all of those levels too. And it just makes us stronger writers, right? That kind of what you're saying, Laura, just, it's going to make us stronger writers, and not that we should be intimidated by that. It's just that's our work to do.
I love that.
Jeff keeps trying to get a word in here, but
no, I'm not. I'm really just enjoying listening. I actually
I feel like this is like another episode of a podcast later. Like, how do we do this?
We'll bring back Alicia McCullough too, because she's got a lot of amazing thoughts about this. But I was just going to chime in. I know that there's some people listening right now that are like, well, I write fantasy or I write sci-fi, so this isn't a problem for me because I can make up whatever dialect I want. And I just want to say Jar Jar Binks.
Oh boy. Oh wow.
Right. That's like
forever. That's
just because he's the prime example of like, no, you can write in space and still be incredibly disrespectful of whole cultures of people. So let's just put out there, since we're also talking about Star Wars this episode, let's just put out there that like putting it in space or putting it in fantasy does not relieve you of the obligation of making sure that you're being respectful of people around you, of like people in the world.
Absolutely. And I think the podcast called Writing Excuses with Brandon Sanderson and Mary Robinette Coel and several others, I think they have done several episodes about this, about the kinds of issues that we're talking about, and covered that. And so there's resources out there. So it does not absolve you.
It does not.
Just because you're writing in, your fantastical world. Like we all come, we are embedded in all of these cultural, social, economic realities, and that somewhere is going to filter in to your fantastical world, and in ways that you just might want to think about.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the beauties of fantasy and sci-fi is that you can bring political climates and political conversations into theoretical worlds that give you kind of a test lab to play with those ideas. So knowing that that's often the point of great sci-fi and fantasy, Game of Thrones is fantastic partially because it's having a conversation about different government structures and the use of power and the maintaining of power and the obsession of power and that understanding of power and how it's applied across personal relationships and across political relationships is so enticing to us. And it's that theme running through is part of what makes those books so fun. But knowing that we're playing with real things in this test lab, we just need to make sure we're being respectful of the people that might see themselves in those characters and in those worlds. I'll also just add something I've said to a couple sci-fi writers that I've edited is, if you're going to do a dialect, plan it out before you do it. Because I'll be reading a piece and I'll get like at the start, the dialect's one thing, and at the bottom, the dialect's another. It's like, all right, I saw that as you were writing this, it evolved. So you need to go back and fix it in the front, or you need to like test it out in a couple short stories before you do a whole book with this character. Like, do something that's going to get the rules of the dialect down before you just start throwing it on the page. You don't have to go like full Tolkien. I don't need like dictionaries and
a glossary.
I don't need that. But I do need you to get down the rules of the lettering on the page before you start trying to write it in a chapter. Like, don't just wing it. That's not, or wing it until you get it and then put it in the chapter. But yeah, anyway.
And that's true of any like changes in like the way people are speaking. So we have this tendency to think that people who have less education than other people use only one type of grammatical mistake, right? Like everything will be written in proper grammar and then we'll throw an ain't in there. And it's
That's
like that one thing doesn't change the way somebody talks, right? Like you have to so if you're going to do that, learn about the way somebody actually talks. And Michele, I love that you brought up that there are so many resources. I mean, if you're trying to find somebody's voice, go spend an hour on TikTok. I guarantee you, you're gonna learn how people
you might not come back. You might not get your writing project finished.
Well, that's why I don't have time to read, because I about 2 months ago I found TikTok. I've done nothing since.
Oh wow.
But like, I mean, everybody, it's so unfiltered that like if you want to know the way somebody speaks, go find somebody on TikTok, because that's a perfect opportunity for you to learn about somebody else and about their culture and about the way, because people are very, very honest on there, which I love. I think it's a great forum. But so anyway, TikTok.
Well, I love that, because I'm thinking also, I'm reading I don't know, Jeff, if you heard when we were on our coaching call, I guess, with Jay, but I'm reading American Gods, and I like Neil Gaiman quite a bit. However, this book, well, I won't go down that rabbit hole. This book is a little challenging.
You can if you want to. I have issues with American Gods, but go ahead.
It's so challenging in some ways, but going back to Laura's point, I think what Gaiman does well, and I should say at the craft level, it's wonderful. At the story structure, a little bit different, but because Shadow, the main character, is not a formally educated person. However, he, knows all these wonderful things about the world. He, understands the world, understands people, and just Gaiman just gets that right, I think. And I think we, people often default to this, like you said, just kind of really incomplete picture, and then they'll just sprinkle like what they think is some kind of idiom or a word that someone who hasn't had formal training will use. Like, that's not, yeah.
And I think that's a great illustration of kind of what we're getting to, that like fantasy, like American Gods, part of what makes that book great is this theme that Gaiman has going, that like we create the things that we worship and we give things life. And it's this very powerful theme going through it. I don't know why you end up in a small town in the middle of it. That is so confusing to me. I also don't know why we have like weird interjections of characters you never see again. So weird. All that to say, though, you're right. Like, he nails Shadow, and you kind of will follow Shadow anywhere. Like, you're like, yeah, I'm in with this.
580 pages in, I think now. And I'm like, okay, this is, but yeah, the following Shadow. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's one of those things of like, that's, for me, that's the power of really strong characterization and really great dialogue, is that like, if you hit me with great characters, like he's, I will follow those characters through a nonsensical plot all day, because I'm so engaged in the character. I so love that dialogue. But if you, like you said at the beginning, Michele, if you've got flat dialogue, or if your characters aren't well thought out, or you're just throwing weird dialects in there that don't make any sense, then I don't care how good your plot is. I'm not sticking around. Like, I'm going to skim. I'm going to skip chapters. I'm going to, one of my dirty little secrets about reading, since Laura shared something of hers, I can share mine. If I really, really like a book, I won't read the last chapter, because I don't want it to be over. So I have tons of books where I don't actually know what the last chapter is.
Oh, so you don't read it like you don't read the last chapter?
Ever. I don't read it
Oh
ever.
my goodness, I've never heard of that. Okay, mind blown. I don't even understand. How are you walking around now like that? There would just be so much longing to
I just
finish.
get so sad coming to the end of it. I'm like, all my friends are going away. So I just like close it and I put it on my shelf and I'm like, it's up there and they haven't left and I'm still in a relationship with them and everything's fine. And someday I'll pick it back up and finish it.
Oh my
But I
goodness.
don't. I just keep it as like this treasured thing that I don't want to finish. Yeah.
That's really funny. I do that with TV shows. If I watch them for like 8 seasons and then they're having an ending season, there are a few that I have committed to, but I'm always disappointed in the final season. So now it's different if I binge, right? Like if I'm watching it all within, 6 days of each other. Because that's all I do is watch TV.
And TikTok.
And TikTok. Well, I mean,
TV
I
while
stopped
you're watching TikTok. None of this is true, by the way. Laura's an incredibly hard worker. Like this is all like, yeah, massive exaggeration. Sorry, Laura, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
that's okay. That's okay. But I do it like I'm the same way. But I'm not that way with books. Like I
Mhm.
love to see a book. I love the culmination of a book, especially if I know that the writer has another book planned.
Mm.
I love the
That's
way.
different. I'll read that at the end of that book.
Yeah. But
I'll
no,
get if it's a series.
I'm all about like how the closure happens in a book.
Yeah.
What about you, Michelle? How do you?
I'm just nodding along because I stopped watching Scandal because in the 3rd season, not to reveal, I mean some people probably have.
We can't spoil the 3rd season of Scandal. It was years ago.
It just seems so perfect, and I wanted them to live in this world and be kind of in this moment, and so I just didn't finish. So I'm more like that with TV shows. Like I'll just get to a point where I'm like, I just don't want to know. I just want to stay in this. But with books, I'm a finisher. I do not quit. It's very rare. Not that makes me morally superior, but I am a finisher.
I feel like when you say that, you're judging us.
I'm not.
I don't feel judged. I feel like Michelle is wasting so much time on terrible books. Put them away.
No,
I should
Put them
just bail.
down.
I should just bail.
That's right. Just put them away. There's not enough time in the world.
Say something that reminded me of something that I really do hate in dialogue. So Scandal, I loved Scandal until it jumped the shark, right? When everything was like, yeah. So, but a lot of shows do this, right? But books do it a lot too. When the reactions of the characters are inauthentic to whatever is happening or whoever they are or whatever the situation is. As I was looking for a book to pick out for the book club, I came across a book. I couldn't even tell you the name of the author or what the book was about, but I'm reading through and it's about page 5 before dialogue actually happens. And this person is running through hell to try to get somebody out. I'm not really sure because I didn't read the 5 pages.
Because you skipped the first 5 pages.
So I get to it and there's this person is talking to this demon and they're having this conversation like they're on a Sunday stroll. I'm like, you're in hell. There's literally like fire bombs and I don't know, like no. And then I was like, okay, maybe. And then like the next line was something like, oh, it's so stressful down here. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm out.
Right, because who would use stressful? Right, who would use that? It's like you'd be freaking out, right? Like you're in hell, right? Things are happening. Like there's death and decay and terrible smells and
like now maybe it wasn't that kind of hell because maybe I missed it in the first.
I was about to say it could have been described. I mean, but that's that author's fault for not saying anything for 5 pages.
But also like it didn't matter what. To Michelle's point, it didn't actually matter where they were, right? Whether they were in an office or whether they were in hell or whether they were at the movies, like the way the characters were talking to each other is like the author wanted to reveal what the reader should be feeling instead of just letting the reader feel it. That's like the culmination of all of the pet peeves that we have talked about tonight. All culminate to it has to be real. Like make your characters speak realistically about real things, or my snobby self will not read your book.
Yeah.
But if Michele picks it up, Michele will finish it.
He'll get to the end.
Clearly, I'm spending way too much time.
Yeah.
Well, but it also goes back to, Jeff, what you were saying too about level of emotional engagement. And I think sometimes, you know, people might be underwriters. So in that first draft or so, it takes a while to figure out what you're doing, where you're going. And then so in the revision, it's like heighten up that, you know, ratchet up that tension, you know, make it clear what's at stake. And I know that that's something that it has taken me a while to do. And that's with good editing, you know, people can support your work in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, y'all. I think we did it. I'm going to stop the recording. Any last words before we turn off this Q&A?
This was amazing and so much fun. And
thanks so much for coming and jumping in with us. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. But I feel for your books that are on your shelf that have not been finished.
Why? They're perfect angels that never die.
They're frozen in time.
They're little baby cupids that are like flying around that never grow old. They're great. Yeah, Michele, thank you for joining us. It was I'm sure it can be intimidating to jump in a conversation with Laura and I because we've known each other for so long. But you were fantastic. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I had so much fun. Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. That's not the stop the recording button.